Hey there! Have you ever poured your heart into an idea, only to have someone try to steal it right from under you? That's exactly what happened to me. A coworker claimed my project as his own, and I was left fighting to prove it was mine. But one tiny detail, a timestamp, turned everything around. Stick with me for this wild story of betrayal, evidence, and sweet justice. Let's dive in. I've always been the creative type, brainstorming ideas that could shake things up at work. Last year, I was part of a small marketing team at a mid-sized tech company. We were tasked with pitching a new campaign for a major client. I spent weeks crafting a unique concept, a bold, interactive digital strategy that I knew would stand out. Late nights, endless coffee, and countless revisions went into it. I shared early drafts with my team for feedback, including my coworker, Jake. He seemed supportive, nodding along as I explained my vision. I trusted him, thinking we were all on the same page. Little did I know that trust was about to be shattered. My idea was about to become a battleground. The stakes were high. This campaign could have been my big break. I poured everything into it, sketching out every detail. I even created a private document to track my progress. That document would later become my lifeline. But at the time, I was just excited to share my work. I had no idea what was coming. The day of the pitch arrived, and I was ready to present my campaign. I'd rehearsed every slide, every statistic, every creative angle. My heart raced as I walked into the boardroom, laptop in hand. But before I could start, Jake stood up and announced he'd lead the presentation. I was confused but didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just introducing the team. Then he opened his slides, and my stomach dropped. It was my campaign, word for word, slide for slide. He was presenting my idea as his own, with no mention of me. I felt the room spin as he confidently walked through my vision. My team looked impressed, and I was frozen, too shocked to speak. How could he do this? I'd shared my drafts with him in good faith. The betrayal stung, but I wasn't about to let it slide. I needed to act fast to reclaim what was mine. My mind raced for a solution as he kept talking. I waited until the meeting ended to confront Jake privately. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "Jake, that was my campaign," I said, staring him down. He smirked, denying everything, claiming it was his original idea. He even suggested I was confused, that I'd seen his drafts and gotten mixed up. Gaslighting at its finest. I couldn't believe it. I knew arguing wouldn't help. I needed proof. That's when I remembered my document. I'd been meticulous, saving every draft with timestamps in my cloud drive. If I could show those, maybe I could prove the idea was mine. But Jake was already gaining traction with the team. The client loved his pitch, and he was basking in the praise. I felt invisible, but I wasn't giving up. I had to find a way to expose the truth without looking petty. Back at my desk, I pulled up my cloud drive and opened the document. There it was, every version of my campaign, time-stamped down to the second. The earliest draft was dated 3 weeks before Jake's presentation. I felt a spark of hope. This could be my way to prove ownership. But I had to be strategic. Accusing a coworker publicly could backfire. I decided to approach my manager, Sarah, first. She was fair but tough, and I knew she'd want hard evidence. I compiled screenshots of my document's history, highlighting the timestamps. Each one showed my progress, from rough notes to the final pitch. I also found emails where I'd shared snippets with Jake for feedback. Those emails were time-stamped too, and they proved I'd been working on it first. I was building a case, but I was nervous. What if Sarah didn't believe me? I booked a meeting with Sarah and laid out my evidence. I showed her the timestamps, the emails, and even early sketches I'd saved. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she nodded and said she'd look into it. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Had I done enough? I knew Jake was charismatic, and he'd already won over the team. What if they believed him over me? I went home that night replaying the meeting, second-guessing every word I'd said. But the timestamps were undeniable, weren't they? They were my anchor in this mess. I just hoped Sarah would see it that way. The next day, she called me into her office. My heart pounded as I walked in, unsure what to expect. This was the moment of truth. Sarah didn't waste time. She told me she'd reviewed my evidence and cross-checked Jake's files. His documents had no history before the day of the pitch. Mine, on the other hand, showed weeks of work. The timestamps were clear. I'd created the campaign. She thanked me for coming forward and promised to handle it. I felt a weight lift, but I was still cautious. Jake wasn't going to admit defeat easily. Sure enough, he doubled down, claiming we'd collaborated and that I was exaggerating my role. But Sarah wasn't buying it. She called a team meeting to address the issue. I was terrified of the confrontation, but I knew this was my chance to set things right. The truth was on my side, thanks to those timestamps. I braced myself for what was coming. In the team meeting, Sarah laid out the facts. She showed the timestamps and emails, keeping it professional but firm. Jake's face went pale as she spoke. He tried to interrupt, but she shut him down. The team was stunned. Some looked at me with sympathy, others at Jake with disbelief. I stayed quiet, letting the evidence speak for itself. Sarah concluded by crediting me for the campaign and announcing I'd lead its implementation. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. Jake was asked to meet with HR afterward. I didn't know what they'd say to him, but I didn't care. I'd proven my case. The timestamps had saved me, but I couldn't shake the sting of betrayal. How had I misjudged him so badly? Implementing the campaign became my focus. I threw myself into it, determined to make it a success. The client loved the final product, and it became one of our company's most successful projects. I got the recognition I deserved, but it was bittersweet. Jake's actions had tainted the experience. I learned later he'd been reprimanded and moved to a different team. Some co-workers whispered about it, but I stayed out of the gossip. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to do my work. Still, I couldn't help but wonder how often this happens. How many ideas get stolen because someone doesn't have proof? Those timestamps were my lifesaver, but not everyone is so lucky. I started documenting everything obsessively after that. Looking back, I realized how naive I'd been. I'd trusted Jake without a second thought, assuming we were a team. That experience taught me to protect my work. I now save every draft, timestamp every file, and limit what I share until I'm ready. It's not about being paranoid, it's about being smart. The workplace can be a shark tank, and I wasn't going to be anyone's prey again. My campaign's success gave me a boost, but the real win was reclaiming my voice. I'd stood up for myself and won. The timestamps were my evidence, but my courage was what carried me through. I started mentoring newer employees, sharing my story to help them avoid the same trap. That ordeal changed how I see collaboration. I still love teamwork, but I'm more cautious now. I set clear boundaries and document every step. My manager, Sarah, became a mentor, guiding me through the aftermath. She even pushed for a company policy on intellectual property to prevent future issues. I felt proud to be part of that change. The timestamps were a small detail, but they made all the difference. They gave me the proof I needed when my word alone wasn't enough. This experience wasn't just about one stolen idea. It was about learning to stand up for myself. It was about resilience. And it was about the power of a single undeniable fact, the truth captured in time. After the campaign's success, I started getting more opportunities at work. My confidence grew, and I took on bigger projects. But Jake's betrayal lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't help but wonder if he'd try something again. He was still at the company, just on a different team. I avoided him, but our paths crossed occasionally. He'd give me a curt nod, but we never spoke. I didn't want to dwell on it, but I stayed vigilant. My cloud drive became my fortress. Every idea, every draft, time-stamped and backed up. I even started using version control for my creative work, like coders do. It felt excessive at first, but it gave me peace of mind. No one was going to claim my ideas again. One day, a new coworker asked me how I'd come up with the campaign. I shared the story, leaving out Jake's name but explaining the timestamps. She was shocked, saying she'd never thought to save drafts like that. I realized my experience could help others. I started hosting informal lunch and learns, teaching colleagues how to protect their work. We covered cloud storage, version tracking, and even email etiquette. It felt empowering to turn my pain into something positive. The timestamps weren't just my savior, they were a lesson I could pass on. I saw my coworkers start documenting their own projects more carefully. It was a small ripple effect, but it mattered. I was making a difference. As my role grew, I pitched more ideas to leadership. Each one was backed by detailed documentation. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was building a reputation for reliability. My manager noticed and started giving me more creative control. I led a second campaign that outperformed the first. The client praised my attention to detail, not knowing it stemmed from that betrayal. I was thriving, but I never forgot the lesson. Timestamps were my safety net, but my work ethic was my strength. I started to see Jake's actions as a catalyst. Without that betrayal, I might not have pushed myself so hard. It's a strange thing to be grateful for, but it shaped me. Months later, I heard Jake had left the company. No one knew the details, but rumors swirled about another conflict. I didn't care to dig deeper. I was done with that chapter. My focus was on my next project, a global campaign with even higher stakes. I approached it with the same rigor, documenting every step. My cloud drive was a treasure trove of ideas, each one time-stamped like a digital fingerprint. I felt unstoppable, like I'd cracked the code to protecting my creativity. But I also knew the workplace wasn't always fair. I'd been lucky to have evidence. Others might not be. That thought kept me grounded. I started advocating for better systems at work. I proposed a shared drive where employees could log their ideas with timestamps. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. My manager backed the idea, and we piloted it with my team. It gave everyone a way to claim ownership without fear. I felt like I was paying it forward, turning my experience into something bigger. The timestamps that saved me were now helping others. I also started a blog on the side, sharing tips for young professionals. My first post was about protecting your work. It got more traction than I expected, and I realized my story resonated with a lot of people. One day, I got an email from a reader who'd been through something similar. She'd lost a promotion because a colleague took credit for her project. She hadn't documented anything and felt powerless. My blog inspired her to start saving drafts and speaking up. Her story hit me hard. It was like hearing my own. I reached out, and we ended up chatting for hours. I shared my timestamp trick and other strategies. She later emailed me to say she'd won back credit for her work. It felt like a full circle moment. My experience wasn't just about me anymore. It was about helping others fight for their ideas. My blog grew, and I started posting videos about workplace survival. I covered everything from documentation to dealing with difficult coworkers. My channel became a side hustle, and I loved it. Every video ended with a nod to my timestamp lesson. It became my signature, a reminder to protect your work. My audience grew, and I started getting messages from people worldwide. They shared stories of stolen ideas and small victories. I realized workplace betrayal was universal, but so was resilience. Those timestamps weren't just about one campaign, they were about empowering others. I was building a community, one story at a time. At work, I was promoted to a senior role. The campaign's success had put me on leadership's radar. I was now mentoring a small team of my own. I made it a point to teach them about documentation from day one. I didn't want them to learn the hard way, like I had. We set up shared drives and version logs for every project. It became second nature for them, and I was proud. My experience with Jake had turned me into a better leader. I wasn't just managing projects, I was protecting my team's creativity. The timestamps were still my go-to, but now they were part of a bigger system. Reflecting on it all, I realized how much I'd grown. That betrayal could have broken me, but it didn't. It made me stronger, smarter, and more assertive. I'd turned a painful moment into a career-defining one. The timestamps were my proof, but my determination was my power. I kept in touch with Sarah, who'd become a friend. She told me my story had sparked changes across the company. They were revising how credit was assigned for projects. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I felt like I'd left a mark, not just on my career but on the workplace itself. Now, I'm working on my biggest project yet, a campaign that could go international. I'm documenting every step, of course. My cloud drive is a fortress, and my team knows the drill. We're a unit, protecting each other's ideas. I've come a long way from that boardroom betrayal. Jake's actions were a low point, but they pushed me to new heights. I'm grateful for the lesson, even if it came the hard way. Those timestamps were my lifeline, but my resilience was my victory. I'm not just surviving the workplace, I'm thriving in it, and I'm helping others do the same. As my career soared, I started speaking at industry events. My story about the stolen idea became a keynote. I shared how a simple timestamp saved my work and my reputation. Audiences loved it. They'd gasp at Jake's betrayal and cheer at my comeback. I always ended with practical tips. Document everything, trust your gut, and never stay silent. The timestamps were my hook, but the message was about empowerment. I saw people taking notes, inspired to protect their own ideas. It felt like my experience was rippling out, helping others in ways I'd never imagined. I was no longer just a marketer, I was a storyteller. One conference led to a podcast invite. I shared my story in more detail, diving into the emotional toll. I admitted how scared I'd been to confront Jake. Listeners related, flooding the comments with their own stories. I realized betrayal in the workplace was more common than I'd thought. But so was fighting back. I started a series on my blog called Timestamp Tales, featuring others' stories of reclaiming their work. Each one reinforced the power of evidence. My little timestamp trick was becoming a movement. I was amazed at how far it had spread. Back at work, my team's documentation system was a hit. Other departments adopted it, and I was asked to train them. I felt like a mini expert, teaching people how to safeguard their ideas. It wasn't just about timestamps anymore, it was about creating a culture of fairness. I worked with HR to refine the policy Sarah had started. We added guidelines for crediting contributions and resolving disputes. It felt good to know my ordeal had led to real change. I still checked my cloud drive daily, though. Old habits die hard, and I wasn't taking chances. My team teased me about it, but they followed my lead. My blog and channel kept growing, and I started monetizing them. It wasn't about the money, it was about reaching more people. I partnered with a tech company to create a free app for tracking ideas. It had built-in timestamps and version control, designed for creatives like me. The app launched to great reviews, and I felt proud. It was like giving everyone their own digital fortress. Users sent me thank you notes, saying it helped them feel secure. I turned my pain into a tool for others. Jake's betrayal seemed so small now, compared to what I'd built. One day, I got an unexpected email from Jake. He apologized, admitting he'd been wrong. He said he'd been under pressure and made a bad call. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His words didn't erase the hurt, but they showed me I'd won. I'd moved on, while he was still grappling with his choices. I kept focusing on my work and my mission. My latest campaign was a hit, and I was up for another promotion. The timestamps were still part of my routine, but they were just a tool now. My real strength was my ability to keep going, no matter what. My speaking gigs grew, and I started coaching young professionals. I taught them how to navigate workplace politics and protect their ideas. My story was the centerpiece, but I focused on actionable advice. Timestamps, version control, clear communication, it all added up. I saw my ments grow more confident, just like I had. One of them even used my tips to resolve a credit dispute at her job. She called me her timestamp hero, and I laughed. It felt good to know I was making a difference. My experience had become a beacon for others. The company's new policies were now standard. Every team used shared drives with timestamps. Disputes over credit dropped, and collaboration improved. I was proud to have sparked that change. My manager, Sarah, nominated me for an industry award. I didn't win, but the nomination felt like a victory. It showed how far I'd come from that boardroom betrayal. I kept blogging, speaking, and building my app. Each step felt like a way to honor my journey. The timestamps were my starting point, but my resilience was my legacy. As I prepared for my next big campaign, I reflected on what I'd learned. Trust is earned, not given. Evidence is power. And standing up for yourself is non-negotiable. I wasn't the same person who'd frozen in that boardroom. I was stronger, wiser, and unafraid. My team looked to me for guidance, and I gave it freely. I shared my timestamp trick with everyone I met. It wasn't just about protecting ideas, it was about owning your worth. I'd turned a betrayal into a movement. And I wasn't done yet. My channel hit a major milestone, 100,000 subscribers. I celebrated by posting a video about my journey. I shared the whole story, from Jake's betrayal to the timestamps that saved me. The comments poured in, full of support and similar stories. I realized I'd built more than a channel. I'd built a community. People were inspired to document their work and stand up for themselves. I felt like I'd turned a personal win into a collective one. The timestamps were my spark, but the fire was all of us, fighting for our ideas. Looking ahead, I know there's more to do. I'm working on a book about workplace resilience, with timestamps as a key theme. I'm speaking at bigger conferences and growing my app. My story isn't just about one stolen idea, it's about what you do when someone tries to take what's yours. I'm proof that you can come back stronger. Those timestamps were my lifeline, but my courage was my triumph. I'm excited to keep sharing, keep teaching, and keep fighting for fairness. If I can do it, so can you. Protect your ideas, own your worth, and never let anyone dim your light. If you love this story and want more tips on protecting your ideas and thriving in the workplace, hit that subscribe button. Join our community of go-getters who are taking charge of their careers. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and let's keep the conversation going.